Amazing. Beautiful.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is the Atlantic Canada Climate Network's Community of Advocacy September meeting, and we're here with Sophia Lindfield. Sophia is a climate activist from Halifax, Nova Scotia, the unceded and ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq. Always passionate about making political systems more responsive to everyday people. She is currently working for Stand.Earth as the Canada lead for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty campaign and for the Youth Climate Justice Policy Network Infiltrate the System. Um, yeah, Sophia's previous work includes helping design and lead the Now for Net Zero grant program, which supports emissions reduction projects in rural schools and Indigenous communities. She has worked as a staffer for Green MP Elizabeth May and Mike Morris, leading legislative campaigns on ending fossil fuel subsidies and implementing a windfall profit tax. And she has served as a member of, is actually currently serving as a member of Nova Scotia's first provincial youth climate council. When she isn't trying to make her rage at the government climate inaction productive, you can find her wandering beaches, writing poetry, and looking for her next great thrift find. So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Sophia. Sophia, thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here to get to chat. Yeah, a little bit about Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and yeah, how we can be doing some cool work on it, hopefully in the maritime area. So yeah, as you mentioned, based in Halifax right now, grew up there, big maritime girl, and so yeah, super passionate about getting to bring this campaign to hopefully get to work with some local communities in the next couple of months. Yeah, on this larger international work that's happening. So yeah. This presentation is going to dive into a little bit of what the campaign looks like on an international scale, and then yeah, chat a little bit about what it can look like in the Canadian context, specifically what it has looked like, and then yeah, how can we can be applying it in our more local communities, and how I can be helpful and supportive with yeah any groups that are wanting to do some work on it. So yeah, I'll dive right in, and then yeah, happy to answer some questions at the end as well, because yeah, nice dense stuff as well. Ooh, am I hearing other noise? Did I do something wrong? Okay, I think we should be okay then. Okay, beautiful. Let me dive into it. So yeah, calls for the treaty really first started, wow, 10 years ago now, which is wild. So yeah, in 2016, when some Pacific Island nations started calling on the rest of the world to actually uh, take the, real cause of the climate crisis, fossil fuels, and actually start dealing with it in a very explicit way, and specifically begin talking about, very seriously a ban on fossil fuel production, and figuring out what a just transition was going to look like in a world that actually wanted to seriously deal with the climate crisis as it was. Um, and so those calls, kind of all those 10 years ago, eventually became a larger international campaign to really seriously start looking at what it would look like to have an international agreement about the planned phase out of fossil fuels and to take their role in the climate crisis as serious as the causation of it that they've contributed to. So while we don't have a text currently at this point, because again, it's still being negotiated and figured out, the campaign has always had really three central pillars that's been part of it ever since those island nations first started their calls for it 10 years ago. Those being one, a just transition, so helping countries, not only move their own economies and jobs away from fossil fuels, but also look towards shifting a global economy and a global financial system that is very dependent on fossil fuels, and specifically having tenets of fairness be really held central to that. So providing technical and financial support for nations with less capacity to do that transition on their own. That second pillar in the name of the campaign, non-proliferation. So by ending expansion of any new coal, oil, gas production or infrastructure, yeah, just having a straight up ban, recognizing that it cannot continue to exist and be perpetrated in a world where we want to be able to stop at least the worst effects of the climate crisis. And then, yeah, thirdly, having a really fair and equitable phase out of the infrastructure that we already have. We're already baked into a lot of climate impacts, and we already have a lot of fossil fuel infrastructure, obviously, that's already been created. So making sure that we're actually coming up with a plan on an international scale for what it's going to look like to phase out that infrastructure and that production. And again, having that central pillar of fairness be a really key part of that, with wealthier and more economically developed nations being the ones required by this treaty to move first and fastest, given that they have the most resources to be able to do that. Why this is really needed, again, to explicitly have an agreement that, really digs into fossil fuels in particular, as well. Again, we live in an age where, we do have a lot of really nice words and nice international agreements that we've put together. Unfortunately, they don't explicitly deal with fossil fuels in a lot of their texts. They deal with emissions, kind of more widespread. But for example, the Paris Agreement doesn't mention fossil fuels specifically by name even once. And it took until COP28 for it to be the first international gathering done by the UN to specifically call for a transition away from fossil fuels. So this really shows that there is a need to have an international document that specifically talks about the role of fossil fuels in any climate work that we're going to be taking on an international scale. This is also, again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir with kind of all this stuff right now. But this is specifically, again, needed to be specifically spelled out in a document because even under the Paris Agreement right now and each country's nationally determined contributions, so each country's plan for how they're going to reach those emissions reduction, even if every country, again, upheld their current pledges, which again, unfortunately, most countries aren't on track to be doing at this point. But even in a perfect world where they were, we still would be far above hitting 2 degrees of warming, really crucially. And a lot of that is specifically because there is not a recognition on an international or even domestic scale that there needs to be an end and phase out of production of fossil fuels in order to hit those emissions-based targets. Since currently over 110% more fossil fuels than what would allow us to hit our scientifically based targets are currently scheduled to be produced by 2030. And yeah, that gap just really shows how crucial it is and how much apparently it still, unfortunately, needs to be said out loud that fossil fuels are a huge contributor to the crisis that we're in and really need to be explicitly dealt with if we're going to be having real talks about emissions reduction. So yeah, this is a nice little 5 phases that kind of draws out the different steps of what this campaign looks like on a large scale. So we're kind of here again at the start at stage 3 at this point. So the initial movement around the idea of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty has been built. So again, that looks like getting first mover countries like those island nation states that are interested in beginning those talks and beginning those calls to action happening. That looks like forming research and an evidence base for why the treaty should be taking place. It looks like getting parliamentarians across the world to sign on to it and to start bringing discussions about the treaty into their own domestic political contexts. It looks like cities signing on to endorse the treaty, beginning some of that political will. And that has all allowed us to start working towards actually formalizing a multilateral negotiation process. So again, what it would actually look like to have a text for a treaty negotiated and figure out what UN forum that best should be happening in. And currently plans are for some of those first steps in that stage 3 to be beginning starting in early 2026 and to hopefully be continuing on throughout that year. So we're actually, again, about halfway through the campaign, which is super exciting. And we're already starting to see a lot of really interesting moves towards, again, genuine international negotiation of what a treaty could look like. Obviously, after that point, after the actual negotiation has taken place, making sure that it's actually ratified by countries and by holding countries to account for their actions underneath the treaty. Because again, it's all well and good to have words on paper, but another thing entirely to make sure that people are actually holding up their duty to the documents that they've signed. So far, very excitingly, 17 nation states have endorsed the treaty and have said that they're really interested in participating in talks right now, which is super exciting. Again, many of these are island nation states in the Pacific or Caribbean, who are some of the most impacted countries in the world by sea level rise and other climate impacts. But we also see really interestingly fossil fuel producing countries like Colombia signing on more recently, because again, even countries that are very fossil fuel dependent in a lot of their economies do see the writing on the wall and do know that we need to have a sustainable plan in place, not just again for the fate of the world, but also, for their own economic well-being, for the jobs of their people. And having a plan is better than having no plan and just kind of going recklessly into a scenario that would be bad, both in terms of climate and economics. So yeah, super interesting to see some of those as examples that maybe we can be applying to our own country that we're in. Beyond those countries as well, again, the treaty has been endorsed quite widespread by nearly 4,000 civil society organizations, a million individuals, 135 cities and subnational governments like provinces and states, and over 800 individual parliamentarians around the world in various different kinds of governments. And so, yeah, the support is really not just at the country level, but also really intentionally, this campaign is trying to include folks in multiple different sectors to provide a really large cultural shift towards being able to even talk about a world where fossil fuel phase out is a possibility. Yeah, supported by, again, many organizations you're likely familiar with, Sierra Club, Fridays for Future, 350, all really awesome folks that, again, similarly to STAND, the treaty campaign is kind of its own international nonprofit and campaign, but the whole point is that it is often housed. Many different organizations will house those campaigns within their own context and try to advocate for treaty wherever they have the most sway. So it's really a democratically shared campaign, which is really awesome. So yeah, why the treaty campaign has been designed the way it is that it very intentionally, is looking to be a successful model of an international treaty. So again, we're not just interested in doing a campaign for the sake of a campaign. We really truly are interested in a world where we could have a treaty and a plan that is legally binding for countries to work towards fossil fuel phase out. And again, that's very ambitious. We are very aware of that and the world that we live in. But again, we're trying to take all steps towards making a success as possible as we can. So we're specifically really looking towards historic international treaties that have had successes around climate and social justice, specifically often the Montreal Protocol, the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And these really speaks to, again, why we have this approach of not just going after, countries themselves that might be at the negotiating table of an international campaign, but specifically why, again, we're really interested in cities and the endorsement process that cities can have, and also the really important role of cities in driving larger political change, which is where a lot of my work on the treaty comes in, and specifically working with municipalities to try to get endorsements. Because again, unfortunately, Canada likely in the stage that it's at right now, and with a lot of the policy moves that are being put forward by our federal government, likely at this stage wouldn't be signing on to a treaty, calling for the phase out of fossil fuels. But that doesn't mean that, again, citizens in Canada and other, again, wealthy Western countries don't also have a really important role to play in working on shifting that cultural change that is needed to get to a point where, again, we know that this shift is going to have to happen at some point, whether we want to or not. It just matters, again, how prepared we are to do it and how soon we do it to lessen the effects as much as possible. And so that's where cities really crucially can play a really important role. Because again, we see major cities in Canada like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal signing on to treaty. We see cities in the US like Los Angeles signing on. And that really importantly signals that, even though US and Canada, other countries like that, likely will not be at the negotiating table, at least the first time that treaty's coming up, and at least for the initial negotiations of treaty. It's really important to be able to send signals that that doesn't mean that they speak for everyone in their country. And also very important, again, to add in that more local dynamic as well. So, because again, this is all about international move towards fossil fuel non-proliferation, but I think really crucially in Canada, I think this campaign is super important because, again, we see multiple provinces, multiple federal governments in North America currently taking really strong steps towards taking us back on climate commitments and locking us into future impacts and worsening fossil fuel economic damages. And so it's really important that we begin having those conversations from the bottom up. from cities, from provinces, and eventually to the point where we can be having genuine conversations at the national government level about the role of fossil fuels in our country. And yeah, I think really importantly, those conversations often are starting at the city level because, again, even if Canada is not at the negotiating table signing on for itself, if we're able to say, hey, cities representing two-thirds of the population of Canada have signed on and ratified the treaty. So even though their national government doesn't sign on, cities representing this many people have actually endorsed it. That does have a huge amount of weight and really helps with that international campaign, but also in terms of our own domestic campaigns of eventually, hopefully, having a government that will sign on to this treaty, even if it's not right away at the beginning, with some of the other countries that are leading the call for it. So yeah, it's also again, treaties really hugely about that international push, but also I think can be really helpful as a way to strengthen local efforts. And really, the whole purpose of having it be an international campaign that is led by many different organizations is being able to use it as a tool for our own kind of more localized work. So we've been able to see really amazing examples of municipal endorsements of treaty then being leveraged by activists to do really amazing, kind of more concrete actions. So in British Columbia, 10 municipalities endorsed the treaty. And after a year after that, a wave of 35 different municipalities signed on to really ambitious building decarbonization policies that are going to have a huge impact on a huge amount of Canada's population because of that. In the US, we saw Los Angeles pass a ban on new drilling a year after endorsing the treaty, because again, activists in that community were able to have a leverage point of saying, hey, you passed this motion that, again, technically on its own is not binding legislation and doesn't require you, the city, to do anything. But you did say those words. So, yeah, what are we going to do about that next? What are next concrete steps that we could be doing around that? And yeah, we also saw that similarly in Austin, where again, they passed treaty and then activists were able to advocate for there to be really concrete investments in renewable energy instead of putting any further investments towards fossil fuel-based infrastructure at the municipal level, which is also really amazing. So yeah, we're hoping to kind of bring that to the Atlantic, or at least I'm very passionate about bringing it to the Atlantic. 'Cause technically, again, I lead and support municipalities across Canada, but I'm a Halifax girl. I've worked in the Maritimes for a very long time. I'm very passionate about the fact that we have really amazing potential for a lot of really cool climate projects here, and we're also already doing a lot of really interesting environmental work that I think the rest of the country sleeps on a little bit sometimes. And I think we're a really important spot for a lot of these conversations to start happening. That I think, yeah, can start in communities here and then have really big impacts for the rest of the country as well. So we haven't seen treaty ratified east of Montreal at this point because we haven't had any campaigns on it. And so, yeah, over the next 5 months, I'm super excited to be working with Stand to be a supporting campaigner for municipalities specifically in the Atlantic region to try to get a wave of us to start passing some motions endorsing treaty and joining on with the rest of the country. And yeah, get some of those conversations going. So as of right now, again, chatting with folks on these 6 municipalities that you can see on the side here. Fredericton, Halifax, New Glasgow, St. John's, Tantramar, and Truro. I'm only, again, here for 5 months. Unfortunately, with the role right now, again, maybe funding will get extended. Here's hoping. But at the very least, yeah, starting with a group of those. But yeah, we'd love to hear again if you folks are based in other areas that you think would be really amazing for us to start chatting with folks about trying to lobby their municipality to try to start talking about treaty. Yeah, we'd love to chat about how I can maybe support with that. Because yeah, my whole role is to provide capacity and support and tools from the international campaign, and again, create ones that can work best to support you in your more localized campaigns to be able to start having some of those conversations at your local municipality. So yeah, we'd love to chat about that. So yeah, I'm very happy to connect further about any and all climate work that you're doing and figure out how maybe treaty can be part of that and how we can show up for you as good partners also during that space and onward even after that. So please reach out to this email with anything. But yeah, also happy to answer questions on the call as well. So yeah, I'm around. Thanks so much.
Sophia, I have a question.
Yeah, go.
How would a community organization or community group go about starting the fossil fuel non-proliferation conversation in
Yeah.
their municipality?
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, again, even just having a group of two people who got together and were like, hey, maybe we don't want, to be investing in jobs like this or infrastructure like this. Yeah, that's even just a great start on its own. And after that, I think it really is about bringing lots of different diverse folks into those conversations. Because, yeah, we don't want this to exist in a silo of just environmental spaces. And we want to be trying to see if we can, chat with local businesses, chat with health organizations, chat with youth organizations, making sure that we're bringing, yeah, lots of different folks into the conversation to understand what impacts treaty would have on them. And then, yeah, also figuring out how then we could reach out to counselors, showing that, it's not just, me over here in the corner who likes to hug trees who's interested in it, but yeah, it's a conversation that's relevant, I think, to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons in municipal spaces, kind of whatever your motivation is. So similarly to how we're seeing super exciting coalitions being built around Draw the Line stuff coming up this upcoming week, I'm hopeful that we're going to be seeing a lot of shifts towards that style of organizing kind of more widespread in the next year. Yeah, as we start working on all sorts of social justice related things.
Thank you, Sophia, so much for your time this evening. Does anybody else have any
Yeah.
questions for Sophia? Margot, please.
I'm mute. Yeah, you mentioned health organizations, and that
Mhm.
strikes me as being one of the key sort of supporters that you want to have locally to get this kind of thing through. That and also firefighter organizations, which I don't know how receptive they'd be to this. They
Interesting.
tend to be all sort of male dominated and probably susceptible to thinking about climate disinformation.
Mhm.
But I think it's worthwhile, and I don't know if Stan, I mean, uh, Zipporah Berman is the instigator of this, right? And I assume she's still
Yes.
involved with this.
Yes, very much so.
So, yeah, I don't know how much she's reaching out to those because you cannot have just a single municipal councilor making the case. You have to have people in the municipality visiting all visiting all of the councilors, and
Yeah.
some won't meet with them, and you just carry on, right, to get the majority on side. So, Canadian Association of Nurses for
Mhm.
the Environment, Canadian Association of
Yeah.
Physicians for the Environment, etc. That's
Yeah, no,
all.
I've been chatting with Tinette, oh my goodness, DeVoe, I think is how you
Yeah,
pronounce her last name.
yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
we've been chatting about a treaty as well. And yeah, she mentioned, yeah, there'd be a lot of interest in figuring out ways to support. Again, like all of us, they're very busy and volunteer based and stuff like that. So she mentioned, yeah, they're not able to maybe lead on all of the campaigns, but yeah, they're very interested in being supporters if there are other groups and counselors that are of interest in different municipalities. Because yeah, I totally agree. Again, when you're trying to reach out to every counselor, everyone's going to be responsive to different things. And again, that speaks to why you need to, yeah, not just have environmental folks, but have a variety of different voices in there. So yeah,
Just
totally agree.
quickly, who does
Yeah.
Tanette work for now that she's left Sierra Club?
Yeah, so she is with Cape full time. She's their Atlantic
Oh,
coordinator.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
Yeah.
that. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, no, I think it was a recent shift as well because yeah, we were chatting about Sierra Club stuff too, and yeah, no, exactly. I think
Okay,
it's the past 6 months. Yeah, she's with them now.
perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Any other questions for Sophia? Well, wonderful, Sophia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.